I think the current moment is really is really helpful to her political agenda. She's showing that the country is paralyzed without her. She's showing that traditional parties have failed to put in place economic policies that would help adjust France's yawning deficit. She doesn't have a better plan, but short of a plan, she can also expose that the others are incapable of acting. And I think that alone is helping her greatly. She can say, look, you've tried everything from, the center right to the center to the left. None of these people, even all ganged up together against the Rassemblement National, have been able to run the country in an effective way. So why don't we try something else? So I think the current moment is very helpful to her.
A political showdown in Paris could plunge the Eurozone's second biggest economy into further strife. French Prime Minister Francois Bayrou is facing a vote of no confidence just 9 months into his term. His drastic austerity budget, which includes cutting 2 public holidays, has angered opposition parties and the public alike. If he loses, and it's widely expected that he will, it would be the 5th French Prime Minister in less than 2 years. With a deeply divided parliament and an economy shackled with debt, can President Macron find a way through to navigate this crisis? To discuss, I'm hopefully going to be joined by Matthias Match, Associate Professor of International Political Economy at Johns Hopkins University, and by Shahin Vallee, a former economic advisor to Macron. Let's start with Shahin. There's going to be yet another vote of confidence. Is France broken?
No, France is not broken, but France has a very divided parliament and very polarized politics. So it's very difficult to find the sort of consensus that you would need to pass a quite severe, some would say austere budget. And so, it's not the first prime minister who falls on the budget. Bayrou, the current prime minister, in fact, arrived when Barnier, the previous prime minister, failed to pass his own budget. Prime Minister Bayrou decided not to go through the motion of negotiating and staking the responsibility of his government on this budget, and decided, in fact, to resign earlier. Formally, he's asking for a vote of confidence on Monday, which he's now pretty much guaranteed to lose. And as a result, he will not go through the motion of passing a budget, unless, which I think is real possibility, unless President Macron doesn't appoint a new prime minister right away, in which case the current prime minister would stay on as a caretaker government and could be asked to present the budget to parliament for the next few weeks, something that Macron has done in the past. So I think, we could lose a prime minister tomorrow and in fact still have him in office for a few more weeks.
Matthias Match, do you see it playing at that? Oh, I'm not sure we got Matthias just yet. So what does Macron have many choices? I mean, it just feels like treading water then, isn't it? If that he's unable to keep a government operating.
I think he has three. I think he has 3 choices. The first one is to appoint a new prime minister. And I think that's the more likely scenario, and he's more likely to do that, within his own ranks, so to speak. So somebody who would kind of operate under the same broad political direction that he has given so far. The second option is to try something new and appoint a prime minister from the left, which he hasn't done yet, or appoint a prime minister from the far right, which he also hasn't done yet. So that would be a real change of coalition to support the new prime minister. I think that's not very likely, because I think that would amount to Macron accepting that he has lost and that new policies will be in place and probably undoing a lot of what he has done over the last 5 to 10 years. The last option is to call for a snap election, which is something that he couldn't do until the month of July, because you can only call an election after 1 year. So, given that the last snap election was more than a year ago, now he can call for a snap election. So that's his third option. I don't think it's very likely in the short term, but he has that lever and he has that tool.
The snap election that he called last June, I think it was, that was the result of that is really what's put him in this stasis and in this mess, is it not?
Absolutely. I think, everybody, considers that this was a very profound mistake. But we could be facing a situation over the next few weeks where every prime minister that Macron proposes is voted down by the parliament. I don't think this is, the central scenario, but I think that's a possibility. In which case, the only option for Macron would be to call for a snap election and to try and get a new parliament and a new power balance inside this parliament. Realistically, if we look at the polls today, if there were to be a snap election, his party, so kind of the centrist forces, would lose out. The left, because they were united in the last snap election around a common platform and a common coalition, and they are no longer, would probably lose out. And the only party that would win seats is likely to be the Rassemblement National, Le Pen's party. In which case, I think the outcome of that snap election would be most likely that the RN would get, if not an absolute majority, which I think is probably difficult, but probably a relative majority and just enough to basically run the country, which, between now and 2027 would probably be long enough for them to prove that they can run the country.
2027 is when they have to have another presidential election.
Yes, 2027 is the next presidential election. So that would give, the RN a year and a half effectively of running the country, and could be a big credibility boost for them ahead of the 2027 election. A year and a half is probably long enough to show that you can run the country, and short enough not to make profound policy mistakes. So I think it could work to their advantage. So I think people realize that now, that a snap election will probably only play in the hands of the Rassemblement National, and it may not be something that Macron wants to pursue.
One poll showed that only 15% of the French public trusts Macron to resolve this crisis. Is there any scenario where he might himself just resign?
So I think if that scenario, to me, it's a very low probability scenario. I think the only case in which I would see that is a case where, he appoints a few prime ministers. Now they all fail. Then he has to call for a snap election, and the snap election does not produce a real majority for the next government. In which case, maybe the only way out is to call for an early presidential election. I think this is a very low chance, to be honest.
Does Macron believe still essentially that there is a centre ground to be found? There is a coalition that could be built around his model of it, or can he just not read the room and realise that it is now hopelessly divided, and he is, if you like, the representation of the inability to bring parties or different groups within France together?
I don't think Macron views himself as the obstacle to the formation of a large sort of, coalition of centrist forces. I think his analysis is that France, because of its electoral law and because of its political tradition, doesn't have this culture of brokering compromise across party lines, a bit like the UK. We don't have the sort of German or Italian tradition of coalition governments, and so in the absence of that, it's very difficult to create these broad political consensus that we need. I think Macron's hope is that the country will, with time and maybe by force, realize that the only way forward is for these broad coalition to take place. And I think, giving time to another prime minister to try and forge that coalition is probably what he has in mind, rather than resigning.
Now, there's a lot of nervousness that as the instability of France sits there politically, it could have an effect on, or could cause an economic catastrophe. I mean, there is this sort of, the background to this is that France hasn't balanced a budget since 1974. It's paying massive interest on its debts. Is it simply not? There's no question of France not paying its debts. Do you think there's any risk at all to a sort of IMF style bailout coming after this?
No, I don't think so. At least not in the short term. But what is certain is that France today is an outlier in terms of fiscal deficit when compared to the rest of Euro area countries.
I think there's only Greece and one other that's worse, isn't it?
Even Greece doesn't have a larger deficit at the
Oh,
moment, actually. So
Italy?
no, France, Italy, neither. So I think there's maybe Hungary that has a larger deficit, and that's it. So I think we are an outlier in terms of fiscal deficit. France has the ability to adjust. It doesn't have the political consensus to do that. So, I think it will either take time or it will take an external shock, which could come in the form of a buyer strikes on French government bonds and a sort of widening of spreads. I mean, something that the UK has experienced not so long ago, and something that may still happen in the UK today. So I think these are concerns that are very legitimate, but are not necessarily idiosyncratic to France. I think the difficulty and what's idiosyncratic to France is that there is no political consensus today in the country to act upon it.
And and how much might the French people's unhappiness with the inability to deal with this manifest itself? We know that French citizens do know their way to the streets. There was the what was it, 2019? I think the Yellow Jackets. Is there a chance that we could see more protest in the streets of France as this process drags on?
So we're about to find out because left-leaning political parties have called for a day of massive strikes on September 10th. So I think we will see if there is real mobilization. I tend to think that in the short term, the mobilization will be limited. The fact that Prime Minister Bayrou has effectively almost resigned, doesn't, allow, in my view, a sort of popular movement to take hold, because it's not clear exactly what this popular movement would try and secure. But eventually, I think if we continue on this path, I think there will be more mobilization. But I think the French public is a bit schizophrenic. I think it is very unhappy about the state of politics and the state of the economy. But I think there is also a level of consciousness about the fact that, fiscally, this cannot go on forever, and that there will need to be an adjustment of sorts. And so I think this is also what's potentially holding back a bit the French public, is that they are opposed to fiscal cuts, but they also know that in some ways, some of them at least are unavoidable.
And and how is Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally, playing this? We know that there's no chance of her coming in to rescue Macron at this point and do some sort of deal on the budget. Is this all part of the process, as she sees it, of their march towards 2027 and victory at that point?
Yes, I think the current moment is really helpful to her political agenda. She's showing that the country is paralyzed without her. She's showing that traditional parties have failed to put in place economic policies that would help adjust France's yawning deficit. She doesn't have a better plan, but short of a plan, she can also expose that the others are incapable of acting. And I think that alone is helping her greatly. She can say, look, you've tried everything from, the center right to the center to the left. None of these people, even all ganged up together against the Rassemblement National, have been able to run the country in an effective way. So why don't we try something else? So I think the current moment is very helpful to her.
All right. Shahin, thank you so much for your time this evening, and we'll look at events tomorrow and see how that plays out. Thanks for joining us tonight. That's Shahin Vallee, the former economic advisor to Macron. If you're a digital subscriber to The Times and Sunday Times, it's not just today's articles you can read. You can access the